For the third time in just months, China has deployed water cannons and other intimidation tactics to prevent the Philippines from resupplying its mission over the Ayungin Shoal. The situation on the ground is extremely explosive, and there are growing fears of a potential armed confrontation, not only between the Philippines and China, but also between the superpowers. After all, the United States has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. Is China moving beyond its so-called gray zone strategy? Is China using strategies and tactics that has to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty? And what are the countermeasures by the Marcos administration in order to protect the Philippine national interests and sovereign integrity? In order to better understand the situation on the ground and what are the prospects for the Philippines' claims in the West Philippine Sea and whether the Philippines will be able to rely on its allies to protect its interests in the area, we have a special guest. Joining us tonight is Assistant Director General at the National Security Council, Undersecretary Jonathan Malaya. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again, Prof.
Yes,
Richard.
but
Yes.
a lot is happening since last time we had a conversation. That's why we have this habit of recurring interviews with some folks from the government because news doesn't sleep because events on the ground are not sleeping. Now, as of this conversation, of course, it looks like medyo mainit yung situation sa West Philippine Sea.
Admittedly, yes. Yeah.
Can you give us a big picture of where we are as far as the West Philippine Sea dispute is concerned?
No, actually, Richard, we haven't changed any of our policies. No, insofar as we're concerned, Ayungin Shoal is a Philippine outpost. We have a beached vessel there, LS-57, which is BRP Sierra Madre, and it is our responsibility as a nation, and it is the mandate of government to continue to resupply. And when we do resupply, it's the same. It's one or two supply boats, no? It's one or two Coast Guard vessels. So we have not changed anything. The increasing tensions are actually coming from China because the increasing aggressiveness, the use of water cannons, and we looked at the water cannon they used during the last RORE. It's like 20 liters of water in a minute. We're talking about jet stream water cannon of around 200 psi. So it's really meant to disable the boat, no? So we are in this situation now na the Philippines is doing its routinary thing, doing its responsibility to resupply and provide supplies and food to our servicemen in LS-57. But China is increasingly getting aggressive in the face of this routine missions by the Philippines.
Thank you, Yusik, for actually quantifying that. Are we seeing an increase literally in the pressure that China's water pressure that China is using, let's say between November last year all the way to March of this year? Because there were at least 3 incidents I can remember from November, December, and then in March. Is the water pressure tightening? Literally, they're tightening the news on around us. What's going on there?
Well, in the past, they would just show us that they're willing to utilize the water cannon. So from afar, you would see them turning it on both sides. But now we also saw them utilizing just one Coast Guard vessel to water cannon any of our supply boats. But yesterday and the previous one, we see that there are 2 Chinese Coast Guard vessels who are doing simultaneous water cannoning of a small Philippine resupply boat.
Yeah, so this is of late March we're talking right now. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yes,
right.
yes.
Yes. So, if the question is asked who's doing the escalation, because we always hear this rhetoric from China that it's the Philippines that's increasing tensions. It's the Philippines that is doing, all of these things. I think it's pretty clear to the entire world that it is China who's doing the increasing in tensions insofar as these regular resupply missions are concerned.
Well, of course, this brings us to the issue of gray zone strategy by China. So for a long time, everyone says, China is smart enough to always operate below a certain threshold. And that threshold could be what would activate the mutual defense treaty between the Philippines and the United States, which is, my understanding is, firing guns or using missiles. But are we seeing, I don't know if this is like 50 shades of gray. Is this the darkest gray zone strategy? Or is it possible that we are actually surpassing the gray zone and moving into something that is still short of, open warfare, but nevertheless a totally new? Because, you had a situation whereby we have our naval officers getting injured.
Yes.
Not to mention our vice admiral from West Command. So this is almost lethal, right? I mean, you're seeing Philippine naval officials injured. So, how is this still gray zone?
That's a good question because number one, um, the Chinese Coast Guard is essentially a paramilitary organization. If you look at the organizational structure of the Chinese Coast Guard, they report to the what is called as the Central Military Commission. So all of the directives that are given to the Chinese Coast Guard and the way that they're administered points to some military decision makers upstairs. So that's a good question because
Hmm.
insofar as we see it, it's becoming more painful as the day goes by because now we have casualties on the part of
Yeah,
Filipino
literally
serv.
painful. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, their injuries have been sustained by our people. That is why the National Security Advisor requested for a meeting with the security cluster because things are coming to a point that um, it's getting more serious.
Yeah.
Okay, and we also have to look at the different options available, and that is the purpose of that meeting to give the president all the necessary um, recommendations that that he would need to make the necessary decisions for the Philippines.
I don't want to be alarmist about this, Yusek, but I always hear either from friends here or across the region that the South China Sea is a generational struggle. This has been going on for decade after decade. My counter argument will be anytime there could be war in this part of the world if China continues with essentially flirting with conflict the way it's doing. Are you guys worried that we could escalate into a literally armed confrontation situation? Is this something that keeps you guys up at night?
Well, of course, yes. It keeps us up at night, but I think there are ways that are open to us to find some sort of arrangement. No,
Mm,
but let me be clear
please.
that we will not be deterred in doing what is necessary to supply our ship in Ayungin Shoal. Our commitment to supply our troops. So, notwithstanding whatever water cannon, whatever they do to us, we will continue to do so because that is an expression of the sovereign will and our sovereignty, an expression of the sovereignty and independence of the Philippines. You know? Um, yes, there has been um, some proposals from China about how to manage a situation. But as explained by the president himself, no, in one of his interviews, they were non-starters from the very beginning, because the proposals coming from China does not respect the 2016 arbitral award, and it does not respect the sovereignty of the Philippines. So our request to China, no, if they really would like a reset of relations, because they've been saying that, no,
Mm.
during the Chinese New Year, the Chinese ambassador said that um, the relations between the Philippines and China are not on the right track, and it should be brought to the right track. So, if we want to bring it to the right track, let us come into some sort of negotiation that is open and transparent, and that the commitment of China should not be in words only, but in deeds.
Um, and has China done anything throughout the year? Because always China does that, right? They say we want a new golden era. We
Yes.
had a golden era, more of a golden. We keep on hearing that, but are they backing that with actions, or are there any discernible signaling, at least by China, that they indeed want to reset relations in the right direction? Of course, you can always reset it in the wrong direction too, right? Um,
Yes.
what are we looking at? I mean,
Well, there was some, how would you call that? There was some hope at the beginning of the year. In our first RORE mission for the year, it was, as mentioned by Colonel Francel of Padilla of the Armed Forces, it was flawless. No, it went very well. There was merely shadowing, which I think is a something we can accept. No, shadowing of our vessels. There was no blocking maneuvers, dangerous maneuvers. There was no water cannoning. So that was already, I think, a step in the right direction. So it's possible that we can go back to that again, because I think um, in the view of China, it's the Philippines that is being humiliated here. But what they don't see, perhaps, is that they are the ones being humiliated in front of the global, uh, the entire world, because
In what sense? Like you're saying, they're being exposed as a bully in that
yes,
sense?
they
Yeah.
are being exposed as a bully. No, their actions in the West Philippine Sea, broadcast by third-party independent media, coming from all over the world, has shown what kind of types of actions they do, and that they're acting, in a manner that is not befitting a respectable rising global power. No, if you are an emerging global power, then you should act in a manner that respects the rights and the maritime entitlements of your neighbors. That is the only thing that we're asking from them. So, given that it was possible in January for some sort of modus vivendi, I think it is possible
Mm.
to be able to do that again. But let me again clarify, Richard. There has been no arrangement or promise on the part of the Philippines, and we will never negotiate with the People's Republic of China on anything that will diminish our sovereignty over Ayungin Shoal. I think we have to make clear to them that that is non-negotiable.
Mhm. So if that's non-negotiable, what is a reasonable modus vivendi we're looking at? Without, of course, you spilling the beans. I mean, what do you? I mean, what is the ceiling that the Chinese have to accept at some point in time?
That I do not know. I do not
Mm,
wish to speculate on that,
right,
because what they say and what they do has a gap. No,
right,
so the recommendations coming from our end has been to empower the Department of Foreign Affairs to look for some diplomatic solution, because I think both the Philippines and China does not want some kinetic action happening in the West Philippine Sea.
right.
It is not to the interest of both our nations and the interest of the region and the world if it comes to that. So we have requested the DFA to be more active and discuss possible options. That is why a phone call has been made to the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister. We have summoned again the Chinese ambassador, and we have issued a démarche in Beijing to get this process going in an effort for our side to lower tension, and we hope that the Chinese government will reciprocate.
You said, just to be clear, so the communication channels have not been severed
No.
or anything. They're as vibrant as ever, right?
Yes, in fact, there are bilateral consultation mechanisms in place. There are regular interactions on a variety of levels within the Philippines and China. It is not only on the level of diplomatic, but also on cultural, social, trade, economic. So there's many discussions ongoing. And we have never closed our doors. In fact, we were the ones making the calls before during these high tension incidents, but there has been no response from China. So we will never close those doors. We are open to those discussions. But nonetheless, we will not begin those discussions with any request from China that will diminish our sovereignty as a nation.
Thank you, Yusek, for clarifying that the communication channels are actually still functional and robust. Because, to be honest, I've been going around the region and beyond over the past weeks, and constantly the question I get is, what is the level of communication? Are you diplomatically trying to manage this? And I always say, as far as the Philippines is concerned, the president has made it clear diplomacy is still his preferred option. I think
That's
he
right.
made that clear when he was in Berlin with Chancellor Scholz. In March, I think he also made it very clear when he met Paramount leader Xi Jinping in San Francisco on the sidelines of the APEC last year. What is our sense here that China is testing literally the waters in the sense of testing how far they can push the Philippines? Is this a chicken game they're looking at and they're hoping that we blink? I mean, what is the understanding of the Philippine government as far as the psychology behind this
Oh, that's a
maneuvers?
very difficult question, Richard.
I don't want to put in the
that question I cannot dodge anymore.
right.
It is so hard for us to discern.
Mm,
No, I'm not a Chinese expert. No, and I understand that the Chinese government has a different way of looking at things. It
right.
is communist for one. Um, China is being a communist government and a one-party system, and given that they think in centuries,
Right.
okay, sometimes it's difficult for us to discern their intentions. So it really is insofar as the National Security Council is concerned. I don't know about the DFA. I cannot speak for the DFA or
Right.
the other government agencies, but we hope that they are interested in a solution that will lower tensions, because, as I said, it is not in anyone's interest for any kinetic action to happen in the West Philippines.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely everyone agrees with it, whether you talk to Chinese experts or experts here. Although one thing that worried me is hearing more and more from some Chinese counterparts this idea of it's time to show the sword. I mean, not necessarily unsheath it, but show who's the boss, who has the upper hand. But for me, my understanding is that so far China is still keeping it below a certain threshold because they also don't want to escalate this into open conflict. And most likely there's also the calculation of our mutual defense treaty with the United States. How important do you think was it for Secretary Blinken to visit the Philippines while there's an ongoing conflict or two on the other part of the world?
Yeah.
You think that was important psychologically, geopolitically?
Yes, it was very important, and I think the United States has made it very clear in visits to the Philippines, in meetings with Philippine diplomats, in their statements that they have issued constantly during these types, that their commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. I think uh, the United States commitment has not been clearer at any time of our nation's history. If you remember in the past, it wasn't clear. It was vague. It was very ambiguous, even during the time of former President FVR, all the past presidents, but it was only during this administration that the commitment of the United States has been very, very was clarified
Yeah.
through this document that they released during the visit of President Marcos in Washington and in successive meetings we have had with U.S. officials.
And I think, to be fair, also towards the end of the Trump administration, when Secretary Pompeo was in Manila and clarified that any attack on the Philippine vessels and personnel within the South China Sea will
Yes.
automatically. So I think we're talking about around 4 to 5 years of more clarity than
Yes.
ever as far as our alliance is concerned. Because you're absolutely right. I think from the Nixon administration to the Obama administration, they literally had strategic ambiguity, right?
That's
It
right.
was
That's right.
ambiguous by intention, right?
That's right.
Because
That's
the
right,
United
yeah.
States was looking at its own interest and other factors there. Now, the reason why I ask about what is your working hypothesis, because all of us are, I mean, I even talked to like super China experts and I say, let's be honest, no one really knows what Xi Jinping is thinking, right? I'm not even sure if Xi Jinping is also sure about what he wants to do. I think everyone is being experimental here. And that's important because one working theory is when you deal with China, they only respect resilience. They only respect you when you stand your ground. And the examples we have is our neighboring countries, right?
Like
So,
Vietnam,
so
for
if you look at
example,
Vietnam,
yeah.
exactly, you can talk about the 1,000 years narrative of resistance, but particularly in the South China Sea, in the East Sea, West Philippine Sea, they have been holding their ground for quite some time. And I think eventually China realized there's no way that Vietnam will fold over. And even when President Xi Jinping visited Vietnam last year, very clear. Like they would say, we're good on everything, but there are also certain red lines. This is something that came out very clearly from the Vietnamese leadership. But even with other countries, so Malaysia 3 years ago, they unilaterally pushed with the West Capella oil rig activities in areas claimed by both Vietnam and China. There were scrambles, maybe not as dramatic as what we see in the Philippines, but still dramatic enough. They held their ground. In fact, at some point, the Americans and Australians also did patrols in the area in 2021. And eventually, Malaysia got its way. And they drilled, and now Petronas has new resources they can access. Indonesia, almost around the same time, 2020, what we saw was in North Natuna Sea,
North Natuna,
China
yeah.
pushing outwards, claiming traditional fishing rights. And President Jokowi, outgoing President Jokowi, now he went there. They deployed F-16 fighters, warships. They bolstered their position in the Natuna area. So one working theory is that there are going to be times where China is going to push the envelope to see what are you made up of, right? And if they feel you're not gold, you're not silver, you're not bronze, they're going to push it. But if you show some determination, you show that you're not going to be you're not going to just easily succumb, then maybe they will try to find a new equilibrium of engagement. So my sense is, and I'm sure not everyone perhaps will agree with me, is that this is that phase between us and them. Because I think one problem the Philippines has, and I don't want to implicate you because you also work in the, but the swings have been a little bit too radical, right? I mean, just the
Yes.
past 15 years, from
Yeah.
Arroyo to Aquino to Duterte, I mean, there are many democracies around the world, but there are levels of swings we see. So I think maybe China has not yet appreciated that
Yeah.
what President Marcos is doing is actually what the Filipino people want. I think President Marcos always, in Australia, in Germany, he said, I'm not doing this because it's just like what I want to do. This is my duty. This is what the Filipino people want. This is just one of the working hypotheses there, and I was thinking, if this is also something receptive or palatable.
Well, I hope that the Chinese government does not undermine the Filipino fighting spirit. You know, um, I hope we're
You mean
not
underestimate our fighting spirit?
yes
Yeah, yeah,
underestimate.
yeah.
I hope we're not pushed to the wall. That will force us to do something that we have not done in the past. You know, we are a very friendly nation. You're right that there has been swings insofar as Philippine foreign policy is concerned, but that's because we're a democracy. You know, Vietnam is not a democracy. It's ruled by a communist party, one-party rule. It's also the same in China. So they think in centuries, they think in long-term policies enshrined in their constitution, which is not the same with us. No? Some of the other countries in the region are also authoritarian states, so they have the privilege or the benefit, if I could call that, to have consistent foreign policies, but we don't have. So we have this situation. But I hope, as I said, the Chinese government does not undermine, our position, so that we can find some agreeable solution. You know, to me, and I'm speaking personally, I think what's important to China is Taiwan. I don't think, and I may be wrong, I don't think the West Philippine Sea, any of the specs there are as significant as Taiwan.
Of course.
So I hope that China, when it makes these strategic decisions that will affect the future of the entire region, will understand that we have nothing to do with Taiwan. We do not care. Essentially, what we care about are our OFWs in Taiwan. But besides that, the issues between Taiwan and the mainland are their issues. It's their domestic issue, if I may call them that, and they should focus their attention there and not necessarily with issues in the West
And that
Philippine
our
Sea.
one China policy is still there.
That's
The
right.
integrity of that policy is not uh, being revisited or questioned in any way. I think that's a very important point, because one hunch is also that China is kind of in a panic mode, not only in terms of our proactive transparency initiative, not only in terms of our determination, but also they're worried about the direction of Philippine US cooperation heading towards the north of the Philippines. I mean, with Balikatan, some parts of it potentially in northern provinces,
Yeah.
some American-led construction activities in Batanes, among others. I think that's a perfect segue, because what I want to also talk about here is the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. Because for people who are advocates of that and implementing that, their argument is everyone thinks this is all about China, Taiwan, or US. No, no, no.
No, not
This is about the
necessarily.
Philippines protecting its archipelagic waters. It
That's
just
right.
happens that our north is neighboring Taiwan,
That's right.
but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about it, just not to rankle the Chinese. I mean, can you explain to us what is this CIDC all about?
The
Yeah.
CIDC is a product of our new national security policy. Yes, last year we issued a national security policy, which essentially recognizes the Philippines as an archipelagic and maritime nation. For so long, we've been so land-based. So our focus has always been on internal security
Right.
operations, and our bases have always been focused on how to defend the Philippines in depth. No,
Right.
so because of the national security policy and the changing situation in the region, one component of the national security policy, and if I may call the national security strategy, is the defense strategy. And Secretary Teodoro ordered the uh, creation, if I may call it, or the establishment of the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, which is essentially about um, making sure that we are prepared for any eventuality, um, and looking at the Philippines beyond our land area and focusing uh, on the reality that we are in archipelagic and maritime nation. So what does this entail? It entails a rehorizonning of the modernization for territorial and archipelagic defense. This also entails some adjustments on strategic basing, meaning uh, we look at the map and we see that uh, insofar as the Philippine Rise is concerned, we don't have significant assets there. We don't
Right.
have forward operating bases there. And that is a gap in our defense in our defense concept. So the CADC essentially a top secret document, but I'm just sharing what I
Yeah,
can
the reason
share
we're
right
asking is
now.
because there's no white paper out there for us to make a
Yes,
reference. So
that's
I'm
right.
just trying to squeeze out some clarification about, because everyone is asking, is there going to be a white paper? Yeah.
Yes, but it's at the moment it is a concept that's a part and parcel of the 360 archipelagic maritime security governance,
Right.
which is a NSC project. So of course, when you talk about national security, we're not just talking about defense. We're talking about diplomacy. We're talking about public safety. So one of the aspects of that is the CADC.
Thank you for that, Yusek. I mean, I think that will help people to appreciate why some of even the ETCA bases we're looking at is way looking not towards Taiwan, not looking at West Philippines, Sea, looking towards the Philippine Sea, looking
Yes.
towards a totally Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
And clearly, this is not about just China or any of
No.
these. This is really about maximizing and leveraging our networks of partnerships and all for capacity building, right? And not to mention some of the bases that we're doing completely independent from anyone else, from Aurora and downwards, right? Yeah.
Under the national security policy, we're realizing that the future of the Philippines is our blue economy. And we have not utilized our maritime resources to the extent that it will change the economy of the Philippines. We feel that the blue economy is a game changer. So how do we then protect that blue economy? By ensuring that we have bases in specific locations across the country that will help us monitor the sea lanes, that will help us monitor possible flashpoints. It is not to prepare for any conflict with China, not necessarily. It is really for us to be able to ensure freedom of navigation in our own waters and to monitor smuggling, to monitor all of those illegal activities, which are critical for us to be able to utilize the potential of the West Philippine Sea for the benefit of every Filipino.
Yusuf, I think that's a very important point because I think one of the unfortunate things in smaller nations is that we tend to be either U.S. centric or Sino-centric. Like this
Yes.
is all about U.S. What U.S. wants. Essentially, great powers, and we're supposed to be playgrounds.
Yes.
But what we want to be is to be a player in our own right. I mean, to what degree this is also about not only protecting what fifth or sixth longest coastline in the world. I think our coastline is as big as Russia. I think people forget how large our coast. But we discussed this in the past, and I think you have also raised this recently. Are we trying to be a middle power even down the
Yes.
road, right? Yeah.
Yes. In fact, Richard, that's a good question because I want us to realize that we are essentially a middle power already. Okay, because the concept of middle power means it is a country that is self-reliant. It is a country that is not a great power or superpower, but it has a voice.
Right.
No? And if you look at our military, no, I won't discuss the economy because that's for another day. No, some economics are saying, oh, we have not yet reached the middle income level, which is necessary to become a middle power. But I disagree, no, because we are one of the largest nations in the world. We're on the top 10 in terms of population.
Right.
We are a very strategic location. And given those facts, I think we're a middle power. But just to be perfectly clear why I say we're a middle power, in terms of our military, number one, our experience.
Right.
Our military has the experience of combat. Now, we have been fighting many internal security problems in the past. So that is a asset that I think none of our neighboring countries in the region have. Number two, our modernization program has brought us leaps and bounds from what we were before. We have jet fighters. We have the
Just in the
Brahmos
past
missile.
10 years, right?
In the past 10 years, we have frigates. We have Black Hawk helicopters. No, we have ATAC helicopters. So we can now conduct joint patrols and exercises because if you don't have the assets, then these countries won't even think of doing joint patrols with us, no? Because hindi tayo makasabay
I mean, literally, it's like you cannot put it like next to their Ferraris, right? Like you have to catch up with them, keep up with them.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And of course, we are, I think, a middle power because I think our mindset has changed, no?
Yes, I think the psychological part is more important. I mean, you may
Yeah.
be already a middle power, but we keep on saying small power, small country. We always think we're like the David versus the Goliath, but people forget even David was a well-armed. Yeah. So, in that sense,
The confidence.
you think we have made that psychological leap already.
Yes,
Inangkin natin, pinanindigan
well, we're
natin.
slowly getting there,
Yeah.
no? But ako inangkin ko na.
I'm glad because like this is what I was saying. Like I think we're almost there, right?
Yes.
Emergent or at least tier 2, but eventually we want to go there. I mean, we have repurposed Rehorizon, the third
Yeah.
phase of what President Aquino started, and both President Duterte and BBM have commendably continued. But the next phase is not just minimum deterrence; it's really deterrence capability, and we're looking at what $36 billion by some accounts, 10 trillion pesos if I'm not mistaken, which
Over
looks
a 10-year period.
which looks a lot, but actually over a 10-year period for a country whose GDP is going to be $500 billion soon, right? It doesn't look that much. We're still going to spend below 2% of our GDP, right?
Well,
So speaking of economics, I mean, it looks like it's something we can afford. It's within our...
we had a long discussion about that 2% of the GDP at the National Security Council. Because that's going to be difficult to reach, given be given a lot of our needs, no, our socio-economic needs and the needs of our countrymen. But I think what makes us a middle power, in addition to what I have said, is our strategic alliances with other nations. No, our increased cooperation agreements with so many nations who have come to us. We're signing this and that. Our strengthened relations with Japan, our strengthened relations with Australia and the United States are important levers I think we can utilize in making our voices heard more. But most importantly is, even without those alliances, our modernization effort and the change in our strategic thinking is important for us as a message to other countries that we can defend the nation on our own, just in case.
Right.
Just in case the other nations do not follow through on their commitment, we have the assets and we have the arrangements, in place to make our voice heard. And if other countries wish to do harm to us, we will also inflict harm on them.
Kind of being the porcupine, that we don't have the offensive capability as much as a major power, but definitely we're going to be that poison shrimp, as Lee Kuan Yew would put it, right? Which is something our neighbors have been working on. Way smaller neighbors, whether Taiwan with a population of barely 20 million or Singapore with just a few million population. So it looks like it's something very doable for a country like the Philippines. Last part for this episode, before we talk about the more domestic part of our national security, because, sorry for you, but you cover a lot. I know that you have been on a lot of issues. But just last point on this, we talked about the Philippines as a middle power or rising middle power, whatever you want to put it. But what about our relationship with other middle powers? The more capable ones like Germany and Japan, which are like third and fourth largest economy.
Yeah.
The eventual great power at the current trajectory, which is India. And then, some countries like South Korea. It looks a lot is happening. We seem to have a very multifarious, dynamic defense policy.
Very dynamic.
Exciting times, I would say.
Very dynamic. We have visitors from all over the world coming to the NSC, seeking to talk with the NSA. I consider myself
every day.
I consider myself privileged to be on the room when these discussions are made. But just to go back to the middle power, Richard,
Please.
If you look at the Lowly Institute and they do the Asia Power Index almost every year, the last one in 2023, they, for the past 2 years, have classified the Philippines as a middle power.
Right.
So if the Lowly Index or Australia is telling us, that we are a middle power, then who are we to say no, right? We should start thinking of this so that it reflects the way we carry ourselves in the international arena. So again, your question was?
And now what about the other middle powers, right?
Yes.
Us working with them.
Yes.
The higher tiered middle powers, if I can put it that way.
The president has been doing tremendously, very well in engaging diplomatically, economically with all of these middle powers. He has been working so hard, kaya nga nagkasakit working so hard. He's been shuttling back and forth. He's just like you, going all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I stopped, making any issues with his travel schedule because I was comparing notes like, okay, I think I have, and I think both of us in our own little way, I mean, of course he's the president, but in my own little way, I see the value because honestly, Yusek, when I go abroad, I mean, I've been in this business for the past 10 years, right? Geopolitics. I feel as a Filipino, not just as Richard Heydarian.
Iba ngayon, ano?
Yeah. there's sympathy, there's excitement, iba yung gaze na sa atin eh.
Yes.
We are not just like American satellite banana. No, this is a emerging middle power at the very least.
And you make a very good point about engaging with other middle powers, because the other middle powers are really interested in international law, because they are not a great power.
Rules-based international.
They are not a great power. They are not a superpower. So they know that the great leveler and that their economies are dependent on freedom of navigation, on rules, because as a middle power, they don't have that gravitas or the nuclear umbrella
Yeah.
to be able to influence events. They can only influence events through international law. That is why it's important for us, and I think the president has been doing a great job in engaging other middle powers.
And do you think that the Philippines could also be kind of a pivot of a new wave of middle power diplomacy, in a sense of, you're already seeing a lot of unilateral arrangements coming out.
Yes.
There's the Quad, there's
Yes.
AUKUS, there's what I call JAFUS, Japan, Philippine, US.
Yes.
But also there are more ideas about like something like different versions of BRICS, right? So if the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa is a kind of a one version of middle powers working together, you can imagine all sorts of different ones: Philippines, South Korea, Japan,
Yes.
India.
Yes.
Is that something over the horizon and something that
Yes,
we're
it
willing
is.
to invest?
Yes, we are. And in fact, we're not just thinking about it, we're doing it.
Yeah.
The minilateral concept has evolved. Remember, this Japan, US, Philippines trilateral only began when the National Security Advisor, Eduardo Año,
Yes.
did his own
Trilateral.
with
Yeah.
Japan and the US. And that kind of arrangement has borne fruit. That now we now have a leader summit in Washington.
Right, in April, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why the NSA just came from Japan, talked with his counterparts there to hammer out the discussion points with the leaders. So that has already progressed to that level. The one with Vietnam has been very promising.
Right.
We have a multilateral with them, and we're not discounting other multilaterals with other countries.
And I think that's a perfect segue for our next episode. Thank you so much, because we want to talk about also how we work with the rest of ASEAN,
All right.
as much as we want to talk about what is happening domestically. Thank you very much, Yusek. I know there's so much more to discuss, and I hope we're not abusing you, but these are very, very important topics to discuss. On that note, catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm Richard Heydarian, and this was The View from Manila. We're One News, all sides, all the time.